Hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. It's a pleasure for me to be today in Abuja, where we are at the Africa Conference of the School of Politics, Policy and Governance. And here I have been able to meet someone whom I've been wanting to meet, at least personally. We've met virtually, but personally for some time. I am here with Gilles Yabi. Gilles Yabi is the executive director and founder of what I think is one of our best think tanks on the continent today. It is the West Africa think tank, WATI. I use a lot of their material. They produce really good material that is on YouTube, that is on their website. Really good analysis on a wide array of subjects of what is happening on our continent, politically, economically, and in various sectors. So, Gilles Yabi, happy to meet you. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to meet you as well, physically.
Right. And I took advantage. I just grabbed him and said, let us talk a little bit about this idea of the functional state. As you know, if you've been watching us, at the level of strategies, we developed this concept of a functional state as being one of the key elements that we have to address if we are going to radically transform the development of our continent. And the idea is simple. It is that development strategies, whether they are implemented by an African state itself, by itself, or whether they are implemented with a partner, technical partner, financial partner, even private sector, have to take into account in the analysis, in the development of the strategy, and in the implementation of the strategy, the reinforcement of the African state and its functionality. The concept has three key pillars. Presence. Is the state present? Is it there at all? In so many of our countries, the state is absent and has been absent for decades in many parts of the country. So presence, meaning simply, is the state physically there and are citizens having access to the very basic services that a state is supposed to provide? Do they have identity, administrative services? Can they get a birth certificate? Can they get an identity card? Can they get water? Can they get electricity? Do they have security? If they are in trouble, can they call the police or an ambulance to assist them in their trouble? Let me stop at this first pillar. Gilles Yabi, we've talked to you a little bit about this concept, but what is your experience with this pillar of presence? Is it truly important? Is it truly something that we have to pay a lot more attention to if we are going to change radically, as I say, the development of our continent?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to discuss about these concepts of functional states, and I might not be the best person to talk about concepts because I'm a very pragmatic approach, and I think that we are in a situation in the continent and various countries of the continent. I think we do know what are the major reasons why we still have a lot of our population in our countries who do not have access to the basic things that every human being would like to have in terms of security or in terms of health, education, and of course economic opportunities. And I think that having a knowledge of individual countries of the continent leads you to a very clear analysis of the variation in the trajectories of the countries, but also the core problem that we have. And definitely, my opinion is that the issue of the states, in all its dimensions, is at the heart of the major problem that we have in the continent. And when I talk about the state, I'm talking not about a particular dimension, but the issue of the fact that states are supposed to be at the service of the populations. And so it is for me obviously a political issue, and it's not a technical issue. But technicalities can come afterwards when you have a mission and when you have a state and you have a political leadership that want to advance the interests of its population. Then you can, of course, look for options, for solution, and then you have the technical part of the work, especially to increase the efficiency of the states. When you talk about functional states, we are talking about the efficiency of the state, how to allocate resource, how to mobilize resource, and how to allocate resource, so that you have what economists call an optimal allocation of resources to various sectors of society. So this has a technical aspect, but I think the first thing is the political aspect, is to make sure that we have state that are the results of a political construction that recognize that the very reason of the existence of the state is to make sure that population are seeing an improvement, progressive improvement in the well-being of the populations. And so it is an issue that, I'm very familiar with, in the sense that I actually wrote a number of papers on the fact that we have to work on building democracies, that we have to work on building states. And I tend always to make the distinction between the two. Exactly. These are, equally important, in my opinion, for the future of our continent. Building democracies, not talking about election, but the core idea that we recognize and we want political actors that have some link with the population. The idea of democracy is just to have, those who govern who are at the service of those who are governed. So it's not about election, it's about, again, this link that should exist. When you don't have this link, it means that you can have political leaders who have no interest in, servicing the population. So coming back to the core idea of democracy and try to push this agenda that we need this link between the people and those who make decisions. But the second aspect is, again, to work on the construction of strong states, and recognizing also that there are some conflicts between. They might have, might have some conflict between constructing democracy, especially electoral democracy, with the short-term aspect of politics, and the idea of building states where you need a long-term approach.
Great. As you were talking, I was smiling because when you said the whole reason for the existence of the state is for its citizens. This past week, I was angry at a particular situation in my own country, and I tweeted, the only reason you are there as a state is to make our lives better as citizens. This is the sole reason for your existence. And when we are lacking water, lacking electricity, lacking security, I was tweeting this because there was a young child who was sexually assaulted and then killed in my city, Douala, which is the largest city in Cameroon. And there is silence from the state in such a situation. This is a job, do your job. And this is what we are trying to say in this element of presence, is that in many of our countries, you have huge segments of the geography of the country, regions where the state has been absent for decades, sometimes since independence. I was working with some groups in the Sahel, where you come from and and that you are familiar with. And one woman said it to me so beautifully. She said, we don't know what the state is. If I give birth to a child, I have to struggle to have a birth certificate for that child. If I'm giving birth, if I have a hospital, I'm lucky. If I'm in the hospital, if it is functional, it is pure luck. And sometimes I have to bribe to be able to give birth to that citizen. And she said the only time we see the state, it is when it's in a form of violence against us. So we see the gendarme on the road stopping us from getting to the other point. We see, if we see the state coming to take our land, but we don't see the state as something which is there to serve us. And this is this whole idea of presence. And I want to just have a last comment from you on that, in that aspect, because you have a lot of expertise on the Sahel. What is the relationship between where we are seeing armed groups, where extremist groups have been able to install themselves, and the presence of the state? What is the relationship there?
Yeah, it is quite obvious, in my opinion, that when you look at the security situation in the Sahel and what has been happening in the region for a decade now, and even more than a decade, a lot has to do with what I call the structural weaknesses of the states, of the countries in the Sahel. And of course, one of the key elements is the nature of the state as it evolves through decade, but also, most importantly, the idea of the presence of the state. But it's not just for the state to be physically present. What is important is to have a benevolent state. It's a state which is present and which is actually bringing something positive to the population, because you can have a physical presence of the state, but actually in the form of violence, or actually taking, the economic opportunities from people. For example, in the Sahel, you have a lot of one of the major economic activities, pastoralism, for example, and one of the main source of tension in the region is the fact that you tend to have security forces actually, racketing the people, and now you have the armed groups, which are, of course, they have a strategy, they have a tactical thinking, and they know exactly how to take advantage of the structural weaknesses of these places. And what the armed groups have been doing is to tap into the frustrations of the population with their own state. That's what happened in Burkina Faso, that's what happened in Mali as well. And so it is, for me, the relationship is very clear between the insecurity in the region and the presence of the state and the historical evolution of the state itself. When you take Mali, for example, you should recognize that you do have now kind of a problem with armed terrorist groups, but it's only one part of the insecurity in the region. The crisis in Mali started in 2012 with the Tuareg rebellion, and the very first Tuareg rebellion was in 1962, 1963, so 2-3 years after independence of Mali. So you still have a link between the very condition of the construction of the Malian state and the current situation. And maybe finally, one I can also add, when you look factually at the presence of the armed groups and the violence, for example, as it is documented by some organizations which have clear with maps of where you have events of political violence, for example, in the Sahel, in West Africa, you will see a concentration of the violence in the border areas. It is very clear. A lot of events, actually violent events, happen less than 50 kilometers from the border. So what it means is that, of course, these places are very far from the capital cities. And as I used to say, Bamako, Niamey, Ouagadougou, the cities in the Sahel have changed. Not even a little bit, they have changed. They all changed in 20, 30 years. But when you look at the villages in Mali, in Niger, in Burkina Faso, you won't see any significant change, after 2 or 3 decades.
Yes.
That gives you an indication of the fact that for, a long time, you have political leaders who just don't really care about improving the situation of the people in the countryside. And of course, again, the border areas particularly are very vulnerable to insecurity. Also for over tactical reasons for the armed group, because they can move around the borders and it's more difficult to reach them when they are operating in these areas. So you have very, very clear indication of this link between state presence and security.
Yeah. I actually, when I was talking about the places where the state has been absent since independence, I was thinking about countries like Mali, but also, I come from Cameroon. We are right now in Nigeria, not far from where Boko Haram has installed itself. And when you look at, there are 4 countries that are affected by Boko Haram: Cameroon, Nigeria, Chad, and Niger. And the characteristics of this space is exactly the same in the 4 countries. This is exactly where the state has been almost absent since independence, and this is exactly, as you say, where when you go in Cameroon, when you go to northern Cameroon, if you are from Douala or Yaoundé, you are asking yourself, is this the same country? Are these citizens of the same country? Because as you say, access to water, electricity is still difficult in our capital cities, but it is nothing like what somebody in the north of Cameroon is going through. And I think because we don't have a lot of time, I think I'm just going to stay on this pillar of presence and ask you, as we look for solutions to these security situations, I mean, people, I think, are not sufficiently aware that the situation in the Sahel is getting worse. It's not getting better. And it is actually a dire situation today, because we are talking about populations who were neglected for decades. They are now being preyed upon by both sides, as we described, both the armed groups and, unfortunately, the armed forces are often taking advantage of these populations. We are adding in there the state that we never built. So you have the ethnic tensions, which are decades old, which were because we drew arbitrary lines to build our country. We didn't draw them, somebody drew them on another continent, but this is where we are. So now, as states, and it applies also to how we are fighting Boko Haram here in the Lake Chad basin, I see the states continuously going for almost only a security solution. It's like they have to beat the armed groups. They have more. They need more guns, more soldiers, more. What else needs to happen, realistically speaking, in terms of the presence and the character of the state? I like the way you put it. Not only present, but what type? Yes, the nature of its state.
Yeah, I think maybe I would say 2 things. One is that I think we should not think that this situation that we are describing is only about Sahel. Because I think one of the major negative trends also over the last few years is the trend towards regional disintegration. The fact that you are more and more talking about Sahel as if you had a group of countries, Sahel, and then you have the rest of West Africa or Central Africa. I think it is a major problem, because it's adding to the structural internal problem that we have at state level. We are adding this trend toward regional disintegration. When you take, for example, the evolution of ECOWAS. I'm a strong believer in regional integration, because I think that when you are poor, when you have weak capacities, you need to have the most optimal allocation of resources, and the regional organization allow you to have this kind of coordination to actually have a better, more effective allocation of resources. So the trend towards this regional disintegration for me is an additional factor of concern.
Sure, yeah.
The second
And I
point,
want to say
yeah.
there that that's why I bring in the Lake Chad Basin.
Yeah.
When I read your stuff on the Sahel, I'm like, this is Cameroon.
It's kind of, yeah,
This is
no,
Nigeria. You know, so effectively, I totally agree with you on that point. And even outside of these strong conflict areas, other parts of the continent are on the same path.
Absolutely.
They just have not reached that level yet.
Exactly.
But the road is the same. Yeah.
Exactly. That is, for me, is very important again, to look at that. This is not specific. I think the additional fragility of the Sahel is actually the size of the territory. We should recognize that for a country like Mali and Niger, Burkina Faso is smaller, but Mali and Niger, it is not easy to actually have the right political institution that will keep all the ethnic groups together when you have such a vast territory, and that physically, even for the president of the state, is not something which is easy, but we should have done better, definitely. Yes. And then when it actually you have vast territories, you need to have a form of state, and the kind of the idea of the trust and the fact that you will need the population themselves to take part in the security is much important when you have vast territories, because you can't actually technically control the state only with the means of the state. So you need the population, and that's exactly one of the major weaknesses of these countries. The second thing that I might say regarding your question is, I think that it's quite obvious that the security response, I would say the military response, because there is also a distinction to make between the security response and the military. I think what we are observing now is a really focus on military solutions with a lot of new weapons, drones. Have never been so popular in the Sahel. And I was even writing recently that at least in other part of the world, people are making war, but at least part of the economy of the world is benefiting them because they are creating jobs producing growth, like Turkey, for example. Yeah. But in our region, we are spending a lot of money with no transparency, and now with power in the hand of the military, no one knows what are the rationale for the weapons that are being bought, and we are not producing them. So even in terms of the economy, it is a major problem to have an uncontrolled spending on military means by the current regimes. It doesn't mean that we don't need military response. I'm very clear. I've been always very clear that we do need strong armies. We do need strong security forces. But it is very clear that to focus on a military solution cannot be the right response to the current situation. And actually, one of the latest event that we organized at WATI was about the regional security in the Sahel and in West Africa generally. And if there was a key message at the end from all the panelists that we invited and who are experts of the region, was to say that we need to rethink the response, and especially to understand the need for political solution, and not excluding, for example, dialogue with armed groups. We should be very, very clear about that, because we are observing again a deterioration of the situation, and I can't see a way out if we continue, with the response which we are seeing in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger.
Yeah.
But more generally, and maybe to conclude, the very rationale of what we are doing at WATI is actually to make people understand that we need to think about all these issues, not piece by piece, but together. We need to work on our political institution. We need to work on security. We need to work on education system. We need to work on the importance of knowledge more generally. And we need to bring citizens in the discussion, because if we want the state to be at the service of the people, you need actually people to put pressure, because the political construction of the state in other part of the world has not always been based on the willingness of serving the population. Let's be clear about the history of Europe, the history of the US, etc. So it is actually the evolution of the state is the result of the pressure that is put by the population itself, and this population needs to be informed and to be, to take part into the conversation.
Absolutely. And, in the same way we have worked on the response for an area, the Lake Chad Basin, where we are responding today, not only to Boko Haram, but to JAS and to Islamic State West Africa, is that we need this idea of the presence of the state. The Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Public Works need to be at the table with the military when we are defining the response. When we are talking about presence, for us, it is, for lack of a better term, but one that everybody understands, these areas need a sort of Marshall Plan. So as you are coming in with the military to, to reduce the violence, you can't wait to bring in the services of water and electricity and education. It has to be a joint, like people have to see less violence today and more services tomorrow, not next week, not the week after, not 6 months after, because what got us to the violence was the absence of these fundamental services. And also agreeing with you very much about this question of dialogue. I'm going to grab you somewhere in some other conference, somewhere in the world, for us to talk about the other two pillars, because this question about the character of the state, the construction of the state, is what we put in our pillar 2 of functional state, about safety and sustainability. You know, today in Africa, we are so desperate for change. We're so desperate for development that we tend to want messiahs. We are hoping that today, if we elect Mr. Yabi, he's going to solve all of the problems that Africa has. And we know you've just brought up the evolution of other states in the world that we feel are more functional than ours today. It happened with this continuous conversation between citizens, grouped in different ways, bringing different issues on the table, and those who were selected to govern them. It is a continuous conversation, and one thing in Africa we have not done in the vast majority of our countries is to create the space for that conversation, to create the mechanisms. Those are conversations that need mechanisms because they are continuous, and this is a fundamental part of building a functional state. You are not going to get functionality. Sometimes we feel like it's only about pillar 1, presence. Okay, if I have good education, if I have good water, but to continue to have good education, to continue to have water, to continue to have electricity, you have to have dialogue between the citizens and the state. So thank you so much for taking time out to talk with us. Thank you also fundamentally for the work that you do, because I think today also in Africa, one of the things you could choose to do other kinds of work, and for being in it myself, you could do, I'm sure the other kinds of work are maybe 10, 15 times more profitable on a personal level than what you are doing. But it is also important for us as Africans to realize that today on our continent, if we do not have people who can think about these solutions, who are good at the implementation of these solutions, really working on them, getting their hands dirty. It's not, again, there are no messiah solutions, there are no miracle solutions. We have to get our hands dirty, try something which we don't always know whether it will work or not, but we need to try, and we need to be in this continuous learning and growing process to build the functionality of our states, without which we're not going to make it. So thank you very much. That's our interview with Mr. Gilles Yabi of Wati, wati.org. You can visit. There's a lot of resources there that you can use. We use them in the work that we do at Strategies. And it's really great to be able to have a conversation. Thank you.